Hi, welcome back to my videos about the Pickles project. Today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the Pickles test result project on GitHub. In a previous video I explained to you what it is about, and I used a lot of words to explain it. Today I'm going to explain it to you by showing you what it's about and how you work with it. But first of all, I need to correct something I said in that other video. In that other video where I was giving the overview of the different projects in the picklesdoc organization on GitHub, I talked about the project Pickles test result, about this one. The thing is, this project is obsolete. As you can see, it was last touched in May 2016. And that is because I moved the contents of that project into the Pickles project. So everything what I told you before conceptually is still there. The only difference is that it's not in this not in this extra project, but rather inside the Pickles project, inside the test harness folder. Good. With that out of the way, I will give you an overview of what this test harness is all about. And I will start by showing you how the result is used. I will switch to Visual Studio, and in another video I talked about the structure of the solution in Visual Studio, and I mentioned that there's a project with unit test for the test frameworks. The test frameworks are used to read out the results of individual features and even individual scenarios, so that we can add the check mark or the cross for passing and failing scenarios in the living documentation. So we support a number of unit test frameworks. So Cucumber JSON, MS-Test, NUnit. We have two different versions of NUnit, the 2 and the 3. And SpecRun, Visual Studio Test, XUnit, also two versions of XUnit. So they all function in the same way, at least all the unit tests are functioning the same way. And so I will just take NUnit 3 as to show off what I'm talking about. So for example, there is a file when parsing NUnit 3 result files. I highlighted it here. There are similar files for all other and unit testing framework unit tests. When you open that file, you will see that it derives from a standard test suite, and that all test methods in the class are basically new versions of methods in a base class. The new keyword is needed in order to be able to put on new attributes onto a test. Onto a method, and in this case we need to put the test attribute on top of the method. Now, so the actual logic for the unit test is in the base class. For example, there's a test then can read feature results successfully. That's actually defined in the base class, and this pattern is followed in all the other unit test frameworks as well. It's always a base class that it's always a specific class that references a base class. So here is the real logic of the test. We parse a result file. More about that later on, because that's the really interesting bit. Then we retrieve the feature that what this test is about. In this case, that's the addition feature. Let's briefly look in the addition feature. That's a really simple one. That's just a feature named with the name addition. Okay, so we have a feature we have a result, or we have the content of an entire file of results, an entire result of a test run. We have a feature, and then this is then the method under test. We retrieve from the results, we retrieve the result for this particular feature. And I expect that this test result, that the result of the test run will be failed. Good. A couple of questions you might be asking yourself now is, parse results file, where does the result file come from? And how do I know which result to expect here? Because in a different test, we are expecting the result to be inconclusive. So how do I know this? And where does the result file come from? So in answer to the question, where does the result file come from? That's defined in the constructor. So the NUnit and NUnit3 corresponds to the folders NUnit and NUnit3 in the project. The result example NUnit3.xml file is here. Results example NUnit3.xml. And that's a rather large file. Good. So that changes our question to where does this file come from? Where does this file come from? And the other question, how do I know which result to expect? That one is still open. To answer those two questions, I will change the solution. I will go to the test harness solution. So remember, inside the Pickles project, there is a folder called test harness. That's where the test harness solution lives. And if you open that in Visual Studio, I'm gonna collapse all the projects here, you will see that for basically for a lot of the test formats we support, there is a project here. There's one for NUnit, which actually means NUnit2. This one for NUnit3, SpecRun, XUnit, which means XUnit1 in this case, and XUnit2. And let's again take NUnit3 as the example. When you open that, it contains a number of feature files, also another directory with minimal features with more feature files. If you look into the other test framework folders, for example here, you will see that they have the same feature files. So earlier I showed you, I talked to you about a feature that was called addition. It just so happens that in here there's also a feature file called addition. Feature is called addition. And it contains a number of scenarios. So, you know how SpecFlow works. So there is an automation layer in the background that's in a different project. I moved the automation layer away into a different project because I'm actually using the automation layer for the feature files of all projects in this solution. If we go into the Test Explorer, we will also see the addition feature. I'm gonna run those scenarios and you will see that some will pass, some will fail, some will be ignored, some don't even have automation, that's by design. And you will see, so this addition, this feature, if this were a real world feature, we would clearly say the feature as a whole fails. And that's exactly what our test in the Pickles solution verifies. That can read the feature result successfully. We just saw that the result of the entire feature is failed. And that's exactly what this test expresses. So we had two questions. where does the results file come from? How do I know which result to expect? I just answered the second question. We know which result to expect because we can see it here in the test explorer that the result is in this case failed. We can look up every expected result here in the test explorer. And of course I designed the whole environment so that exactly those scenarios pass that I need to pass in the test, and so on and so on. Good. So I will shortly answer the question, where does the test result file come from? One more thing about this environment here. You do not usually need to touch this. The situations where you do need to touch it is when you notice a bug in the code that reads test results from a test result file. The most probable place for this to happen is in the parsing of individual results in a scenario outline. With some frameworks, especially the ones from Microsoft, that's a really tricky business to get it absolutely right. So when you notice there's something not correctly working, then first step, you go in here in the test harness solution and create one more scenario or one more feature to model your case. For example, I talked about scenario outlines just now, so I have a couple of situations with scenario outlines. Funny things can happen if you have more than one examples section in a scenario, which is perfectly legal in Gherkin. But the results that are produced by some of the unit test frameworks are a bit messed up. Yeah, there's a lot of funny scenarios, like I didn't sit down to make those up. Those are based on bugs that people reported me. Another one is when you have special characters in the scenarios. It's I don't really see the sense in it, but some people apparently put regexes in there in the examples of the scenario outline, and that wreaks all kind of havoc with the routines of Pickles to retrieve the correct test results. So whenever you notice a bug in that area, the first step is create a scenario in these feature files. And to make sure that the bug does not occur or the bug is fixed in all unit test result providers, you need to add this scenario in the NUnit3 project, in the NUnit project, MS test project, specrun, xunit2. So that's a bit of tedious work, but if you want to make sure that all the test results are supported, all the unit test frameworks are supported equally, then this is an important step. To make it more interesting, there's also, if you look at the test explorer, there's also here a directory about Cucumber and Cucumber.js. They are not there are no Visual Studio Project files in there, because Cucumber for Ruby on Rails and Cucumber for JavaScript are obviously not supported in Visual Studio, at least not back when I was actively working on Pickles, and I don't think that changed now. So if you go in there, you will also see the same feature files, the same minimal features directory. It has its own automation layer. So that contains just the same thing as the stuff in Visual Studio. And the same goes for for Cucumber.js has also some automation layer. Good. So if you notice a bug somewhere in the routines where Pickles parses test results out of test result file, then the first step is to add a corresponding scenario in the test harness solution in all the projects in Visual Studio, also in the non-Visual Studio projects like Cucumber.js. And then comes the really important part. Here in the root folder of the Pickles project, there's a PowerShell file called create test results. That's the file that actually makes sure that the test result files appear in the Pickles solution. So yeah, this was written in a phase where I really liked PowerShell. And what it does is it runs tests. For example, it uses the NUnit console, so the NUnit2 console, to run the NUnit project, and it produces the results example unit NUnit XML file. Then we can create, so here on the third one, here in the third line we have NUnit3, where we use the NUnit3 console to generate, at the end of the day, the result example NUnit3 XML file. So, switching to Pickles, we had a question, where does the results XML NUnit3 XML file come from? Answer, here in this PowerShell file. It's created by running the feature files from the test harness for NUnit3. And then, so it's first created there, and then in the next step, this file is moved into the Pickles test framework NUnit project, into the NUnit directory, into the NUnit3 directory, forced to overwrite any previous files there. And there we are. There arrives the results example NUnit3 file. So, to recapitulate, in the Pickles project, we test the capabilities of all the supported unit test frameworks to make sure that Pickles can parse their result files correctly. We do that by having test classes that derive from a standard test class. So we also make sure that all unit test frameworks are tested equally. It uses every one of these test classes uses a result file and has then certain tests that we take from the base class and just put a new method around with a test attribute. These test files are produced by the PowerShell script create TestResults.ps1, where we run unit tests in one step, and then in the next step move the result items into the Visual Studio project tree of Pickles, and those tests ultimately derive from, for example, the NUnit project in the test harness solution, which contains a set of feature files that are carefully set up to provide the exact data that is needed in the unit tests in Pickles. Good. That concludes my explanation of what the Test Results project is about. As always, if you have questions, contact me.